Oh, come on, come on, come on. We're all here in this beautiful conference center. We have classical music in common. We're here, we're talking about the future. We're talking about some amazing stuff. How you guys doing today? Come on. Oh, that was such a classical response. We're gonna kick things off with just a little video as the room settles down and we continue to mingle and come in. So, yeah, we hope you enjoy.
How's everybody feeling? Woo! Woo! Come on, come on, come on. How is everybody feeling? Any quarter or dime or nickel or any sort of change that you put into this jar. So you put it in there and we'll do it. And the faster you put them in, the faster we do it. We won't stop. We're here to be a human jukebox for you. Challenge.
Wait until they play that.
Jurassic Park! One more time, boys, one more time.
So that goes on and on. We'll let you imagine where it goes from there.
This is, I'm Geoff Kimpton, president of the Interlochen Center for the Arts.
My name is Michael Thurber. I am an alumni of the Interlochen Center for the Arts.
And we conceived this session, we thought we would kind of do a generational pairing. I would never start off a presentation like this at all. I'd get up there doing like we all do as presenters and be very formal and very straight, but I got this guy with me and we decided to kind of mix it up a little bit. And that's part of what our presentation is about today. We keep talking about the future, 2020, 2030, 2050. And we keep talking about change, but do we know why we need to change? Do we know the impulses that are driving us to be different? Do we know the generational influences that are affecting our organizations, arts and culture, how people use media and technology, how they interact with each other, and how is that changing from people Michael's age?
I'm the 63-year-old leader of the Interlochen Arts Academy. He's the 28-year-old guy that lives in New York. So just in case you guys were unclear about that.
And so we're trying to figure out how we can communicate to all of you that these are the real issues that we're grappling with as we try to figure out how our organizations adapt to change in the future. A part of this is that when we talk about is classical next, we have a real opportunity in classical music. That's what our organization does, actually in all 6 arts organizations you'll see in a second. Is classical the next organization or industry that's going to go through radical change? I mean, look at the newspaper industry. Look at how we consume the news. Look at what's happened to manufacturing, autos and steel, radio, recording industry. They've all dramatically changed. Are we the next ones that are going to move in some kind of epical move to the left or the right? Or is this our time? Is this an opportunity to really step back and think about what it is that we can do differently? So we thought we'd just a little bit about Interlochen Center for the Arts, because we're going through this struggle with all of you. There are 5 components to Interlochen. We're based in Michigan, in the northern half of, right in the smack dab in the middle of the United States. Interlochen Arts Academy, 500 students, America's first boarding high school in the arts, in all 6 disciplines. Interlochen Arts Camp, the oldest arts camp in the United States, founded in 1927. 2,700 students arrive in a month to spend the summer with us. Interlochen Presents, which is our presentations arm, 600 events a year, about 150 professional events. Chris Gruitz is the head of that, is here with us. Interlochen Public Media, which is a network of public broadcasting stations that broadcast throughout the northern half of Michigan, but also around the world with web streaming. Thousands of people join us a day, and is also to become our digital interface in the future. And finally, Interlochen College, which is our adult and professional education program. Okay.
So the thing that's really interesting for me being here is that I am actually a product of Interlochen, and my first year as a student there was actually Jeff's first year as president. And one thing that a lot of people don't actually know about Interlochen that's very cool and very relevant to what we're going to talk about is that it's obviously education-based, but we're dealing with students from 8 all the way up to 88 years old. We have post-college programs, we have pre-college programs, we have obviously the high school academy, which is what I'm a product of, and it's very, very interesting to see how you deal with all of these different generations of people, right? That's something we've heard a lot throughout the conference already, is how do you deal with the learning curve of people that are in their 60s versus people that are in their 20s versus Generation Z who's on their way up.
So at the heart of this is a belief in our organization that fundamentally legacy arts organizations are going to dramatically change in the next 30 years. We think that as a world we're going to move away from them, which is very concerning to us and was part of our whole vision building process. We think that traditional arts education organizations, particularly colleges and conservatories, are going to go radical change. They're probably going to be bypassed by a lot of people who aren't going to need those to go off and create new and exciting things in the future. It's a little concerning for us since that's where all of our students go. But what we want is that people think about what is the core purpose for these legacy organizations, and is there actually an opportunity to diversify their programs? And today we want to talk about why we would do this. This is a great slide. Everybody in here has a different perspective. These are eyeballs of different kinds of animals and insects. Some sense heat, some can sense distance, so they know how fast to jump to eat something. Some eyes actually have olfactory sense and can smell. But the fact of the matter is we all have different perspectives, and our eyes really take in the reality of today. But we need, as humans, to be able to look out with a 360 vision and think about what it is that we need to be changing and why we need to be thinking about this in 2050. So if our focus is only on this year or next year's season, it's too short a time frame to be successful in helping large organizations and legacy organizations think forward into the future.
And as we move forward, we have this beautiful image of the map, right? We're not Magellan anymore. We're not Marco Polo anymore. We're not using hand-drawn maps. We're not using telescopes. This is a time where we have literally all of the information you could possibly want about everything that has already happened, and predicting what's about to happen has become easier than ever with all of the analytics that you can get online, all of the different ways you can track things, all the different great minds that are sharing information on the internet, right? So this is really on us. There's really no excuse for moving forward, okay? Because we have all the information that we need. We have all the tools at our fingertips. If it's possible to predict the future, we are in the best position right now that we ever have been. So we need to, take control of that.
But if you say you don't want to predict the future, we think it's because you don't want to, rather than really thinking purposely about it. We were at a conference a couple years ago at a bunch of us, some in this room, at Harvard Business School, and Ren Levy, who is the now retired head of Lincoln Center, said that our job is to become CFOs. No longer are we going to be CEOs, we're going to be CFOs. And of course, everybody in the room laughed, thinking that it was about money. And he said, no, you need to become chief futures officers. And he said, leaders have no choice. You must make decisions based on assumptions. That is, you must predict the future. And that's what we're trying to think about. That's what we've kind of employed in our organization. And I think as we look forward, we'll give you some ideas of how that can actually happen. I actually spend a huge amount of time actually doing that with my 350 employees and another 1,000 in the summer, trying to help them realize that the changes we make today are really intended to have an impact with audiences, with programs, with development, with fundraising further down the road, 5, 10, 15 years. That's really hard. And some people just can't do that, and they won't.
You wind up like this guy.
they can't grapple with it.
Sadly, we do need to grapple with it, though, right? Because if we all stick to the status quo and we all cling to these things that we used to know work but clearly are not working, it's sort of like what Einstein said. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing again and again, expecting different results, right? So the longer we stick to these old molds that are no longer functioning, the more isolated and the more stuck we're going to become, the more removed from all of the energy and all of the flow of information and technology.
So we're going to divide into 3 sections today. How did we get here? What is changing that requires new thinking? And what must we consider? And we're going to pause at the end of each section of different slides and information we're going to give to you to think about where we are today, where we need to go, and we're going to tweet. So this is a 21st century conference, and we decided that going around and asking everybody to raise their hand and talk, that we're going to have you tweet. So pull out your electronic devices, and there are some key assumptions about the conversations you're going to have with each other. So we're going to take little 5-6 minute breaks. You're going to turn to your seatmate next to you or your colleagues who are there, or turn your chairs inward, and we're going to give you a question to grapple with, and then we want you to tweet the response up. But here are the key assumptions. There's no right way or wrong way. There's just a new way. We're not condemning the past. We're trying to find a way to transition to the future. Your generational values are neither right nor wrong. They're just different. Mike's right, I'm right, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right. That's hard to do, but in a 21st century organization, really that's the way you have to approach moving forward. You can't decide that those who kind of set their values in the 1970s are wrong, and this guy is right just because of his age. So it's kind of a both-and situation. And finally, it is both-and, not either-or. All right? So we're going to move forward. Here's your Twitter test. It's @classical2050. And Mike's got his phone. And
we'll be monitoring it as you guys
monitoring it. We'll pull up Twitter, and we'll be able to see what your responses are, and we'll hope that this works. A little more efficient use of time. Okay?
This is all about predicting the future. Will
Right.
the Twitter screen work during our talk?
This is the high-tech part. All right. So how did we get here? You notice that the danger tape, the police tape, is off of Lincoln Center, Metropolitan Opera. And we're going to start first by kind of looking backwards.
So there is an amazing futurist and a really talented demographer, Alvin Toffler, and I don't know who's familiar with his work, but he has this great concept of waves of change, and he's actually divided it so kindly for us into 4 very cleanly organized waves that are all based on basically different game changers that have happened, innovation that's happened in creativity, the way human beings function in technology, and he's broken those down through history.
So the 4 waves are agricultural, and we'll get into the specifics here and why these dates are important. Ancient to 1877, industrial wave 1877-1963, informational 63 to 89, and the virtual 89 until whenever. The agricultural age, hundreds of centuries long, from feudal to monarchy, information was controlled by a few, land is power. The printing press started a gradual process of access to information and kind of a breakdown of those power hierarchies, gradually leading to new ideas, but it took hundreds of years for political and religious social change to happen as more information was accumulated. And it was largely arts for aristocracy in the church. If we look at the industrial age, started in 1877. People say, oh, it's when the telephone was invented. Actually, that's not true. In the United States, that's when, in the census, more people lived in cities than lived on farms, which is surprising to think in a country that is so vast that that's true, but that's when the census flipped and we became more of an urban culture. So we developed systems and organizations to manage growth and complex human issues in education, in business, in industry, in manufacturing, in health and human services, and in the arts. Many of the great museums, orchestra programs, theater companies started in the 1870s and 1880s. Groups then became very, very important. You had the rise of the professional organizations, but they became more important than the individual. And technology, gradually at the end of this wave, began to push the issue of communication and access and ideas and a sense of global belonging, partially fueled by 2 disastrous world wars and the technology that came from that. The information age started in 1963, according to Toffler, because that's the year in which the silicon chip was invented that allowed miniaturization and, of course, led to the great personal computer revolution. That began a very disruptive series of relationships between individuals and institutions, really reversing about 80 years of change that came before that, giving individuals a lot more power, began to break down power hierarchies. It created a much more global sense. You began to see internationalism happening, and in some cases overriding nationalism, and information created by individuals changed the power structures for large organizations and set up where we were with the virtual age. And here's the virtual baby.
Here I am. Ta-da! So I'm born in 1987. I'm actually old for this generation because I actually was around for a few years with DOS dial-up before the internet became a mainstream thing. But by the time I was 8 or 9, AIM was it, and I was talking to all of my 4th grade girlfriends every day at the end of school. And this, it really is a generation where, because of all of this technology, we are extremely individual, right? So polar opposite of the industrial age, when you had these groups of people formulating and structures and business models sort of emerged during that time, right? My generation is very much about sort of the explosion of all of those things. We have access to anything we want, whenever we want, on a phone, on a tablet, on a computer, and people that are even younger than me, that is the only way of life that they know. So they're not interested in big organizations. They're not interested in hierarchy. They're not interested in being in a group. They want to curate every aspect of their life, what they listen to, what they wear, what they read, and they want to do it all the time.
So it changes our world experience, and it also gives people abilities to create an individual world, kind of a virtual world on their own, which can reinforce their values. That can be a positive experience. That can also be a negative experience. And the negative thing is the thing we're worried about for arts organizations in the future, that people can kind of marginalize the work that we might do because they can kind of live in their own netherworld. It's something we have to think about. The virtual, blurring the lines between art and entertainment.
This is a big one, right? Because again, as things get more and more individualized, you see this amazing sort of Renaissance person beginning to emerge, right? An artist no longer is about violin playing, okay? You don't just study and you play violin really well and you don't worry about anything else in your life. You can do that, but that's not what's going on right now with the current generation and with more and more. You learn how to play violin, you also learn how to edit video because Final Cut Pro is $200 and you can download it on your laptop and edit as well as Steven Spielberg does. You record your own record. Why save up a bunch of money and go do it at a recording studio when you could do it in your bedroom? So you're an engineer, you're a video editor, you're a violin player, you're a promoter, you put it up on YouTube and you share it, right? So all of these things are becoming very, very interdisciplinary, very, very blurred, again, very, very individualized, and that's a result of all of the technology that we have now.
And what's challenging us is that we've tried to codify the learning and the disciplines through hundreds of years of education and university training, and it can be really broken apart pretty simply. Because you've got more and more options and choices for people that kind of bypass some of those traditional systems that we use, both for power and for structure and for giving people the imprimatur to move further up. And that in the next 30 to 40 years is going to dramatically change, we think. There was just a big conference of the European Conservatories, the College Music Society, I think at the Guildhall School in London, that came up with this manifesto for the future. Will they really change? That's the question we have to think about. What's happened, though, is the power structures are moving. My generation looks at institutionalism and representative governance.
We're pretty informal. I mean, even just look at us. You know, he's got this nice suit on. I've got this low-cut shirt going on, right?
I can't do that.
You might surprise yourself.
if we look at kind of an industrial early informational that a lot of us are still stuck in, and I don't think that's inaccurate, we have exclusivity, we're into competition and authority, we really look at the control of resources.
And for us, one of the big things is that we really make our own culture. Again, we're not looking out to try to have somebody tell us what we're into or what we're all about. We're curating that ourselves all the time.
A lot of us are really uptight about having to share everything on Facebook. How many questionnaires do you need after you go to a Hilton hotel? But we get them all. We really try to keep the organization separate from private and public. On the other hand,
here's another really big one that we're going to get into more as we go. This one on the bottom, short-term conditional affiliations, more overall participation. To me, what this means is, again, rather than trying to lock in and say, this is my job, and I'm going to climb the ladder, and then I'm going to turn 60, and I'm going to retire, and it's going to be a long-term affiliation. It's more like, oh, you organization, you have something that I'm interested in right now for this project. Let's do something for 5 or 6 months, and then that's it. I'm going to go on, and I'm going to do something with somebody else. I'm going to get a new job. I'm going to start a new company. Very short term.
So whether we like it or not, there's a temporality about younger generations that comes right into conflict with the long-term affiliation and loyalty that many of us have worked to cultivate our customers, our constituents, our clients for years and years and years.
So this, again, when we get to distribution systems, it's sort of the same idea that we keep sort of getting to, from structured and defined to ubiquitous and shifting. Social media, Skype, Google to virtual reality, right? This is no longer about a unanimous, this is the one place that I go to get all of my information. This is now very, very spread out between devices, between platforms. I mean, the new generation, they don't even use Facebook. They use Snapchat, and that makes me feel old. You know, I don't even know how to do a Snapchat.
So one of the things that we're looking at is this era of what you would call VUCA. This is some leadership training that's happening once again at the Harvard School. And about predicting the unpredictable. We live in times that are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. And when we're living in those times, we get very nervous about change because there's all this stuff that's circling around us that's really, really hard to deal with. We think this puts a significant pressure on leadership and diffuse leadership throughout the organization. And there's a way to counter this, because if you let this control how your organization thinks about the future, we think you're probably going to turn into some kind of paralysis. It's really difficult because it spreads a lot of fear amongst employees. So countering VUCA would be, you need, from volatility, you need to find stability and confidence, uncertainty, anticipating the future trends, complexity, trying to provide simplicity of focus, purpose, actions, and ambiguity, clear communication. Multiple strategies is important. So we're going to talk about this in the planning process in the next section. But now there's a couple of quotes here, and then we're going to get to our first question. So are we tweet prepared? Are we ready? A couple of these quotes are really good. The bottom one I love, Stephen Covey: to know and not to do is not to know. If we know that there are challenges out there, and we know that we have this sea of new people and kind of new generations beginning to impact our organizations, and we choose not to look at that in a very holistic manner, we're kind of turning our back on the process. A group that fights and finally gets web streaming 10 years after it started is behind the curve, and there's already all this other stuff that we're trying to catch up with. So we're trying to help focus that idea, is that if you know that there are issues you need to deal with, you need to deal with them and really plan them into your organization. So here we go. What's the greatest challenge facing your organization or the arts today? Tweet a response, a comment, a thought to at Classical 250. Take about 5 minutes. As Mike Myers used to say, talk amongst yourselves from Saturday Night Live. Turn to each other, turn into small groups of 4. They allowed us to mess the room up. Thank you, Louisa. And kind of think about, of those things that we just listed up there, what do you, or there may be others, what do you think are the key things, is the greatest challenging facing your organization or you as a presenter, as a performing person, as a leader of a small ensemble, as the head of a school? What do you think that might be?
And the more honest you are about it, the more helpful it is for everybody.
This is the feedback section. So you got about 5 minutes, so go at it. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna keep moving here so that we don't run out of time. We'll come back to these tweets a little bit later on, but some are saying it is as simple as funding. Lack of diversity and therefore public legitimacy. Multiplicity of desire. How does audience include us in their choices? Absolutely true. So you can keep putting those on there, and we're going to come back to that. And we're going to go back to this.
You want to go back to play?
Play, and hopefully it'll go back to where we were.
Look at, oh, no, we got to skip
no.
ahead a little bit.
All
Go
right.
ahead. This is just in case you forgot. This is the
Yeah,
Spark
this quiz.
Notes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
That's the black one. Yeah.
Here we
All right.
go.
Here we go. Okay. So what's changed? These are some of the things right now that we would call transitory trends that we have to grapple with, and many of us are grappling with them. They lead on to something later, which we're going to talk about later, but obviously this is the big one.
This is a very, very big one, right? Speed of decisions and information changes in style and genre, right? This is huge. Again, even for somebody my age, and we got a tweet up there of somebody who's 25, so we have people that are even younger in the room. For us, it's still the same thing, right? It's an anxiety that gets inside of you from all the decisions. Like, I went to check the Twitter feed on my phone, and I had 3 WhatsApp messages from 3 different people, and right there, my attention is divided. Who do I respond to first? What do I do? On a macro level, those things are happening in your organization, right? I mean, we all know that. That's not a surprise. New things are happening. Something new is in a headline every day. A new video starts going around. A new trend happens. You don't know where to even begin, and sometimes it almost becomes this decision paralysis.
So part of the process of so many different things happening at once and the speed of the expectation that things will be faster and faster. I love it. I was on a plane flight about 5 hours across the U.S., and even though I have Wi-Fi on the plane, I landed, and it had been 20 minutes since one of my young staffers wrote me. She said, "You haven't responded back." Well, I was in security, you know. I mean, I couldn't. But to her, it's like, man, where were you? So, when there's a crisis, when there's a big event going on in your organization, you're getting bombarded by social media. There is kind of a paralysis dealing with leadership around the country, at least in our country, of people who feel they have to respond almost too soon. And that level of speed, I think, makes it difficult for us to kind of step back and look and see where organizations are going and really kind of think thoughtfully about what's the next step, what's the next step, what's the next step. This is a huge issue for all of us. We are serving 5 generations of living human beings, people representing 9 different decades. And you know what? Everybody wants it exactly their way, customized to their set of values, to the way they want it. In our organization, my elder donors, they're on the computer, but they want it in print. They want that coffee table thing. They want it in print when I come to them and ask them for money. They don't want to tweet for money. Younger people have a very different perspective. I'm learning so much from my 6-year-old grandson about where things are going to go for his generation. But this is a big, big issue, and it's a big issue within organizations. I have a lot of 20 and 30-somethings in my communications and marketing group. They really have a hard time figuring out why they have to do things differently for the older generations. It's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? They don't read digital? They can't get this? No. You have to really help them think about that. This is a big issue for organizations.
And to take that one step further and to segue into this idea, you know, the multi-generational thing, and I know we've heard this so many times, it is very big deal specifically in our community as classical artists, right? Because pop music, a startup in Silicon Valley, they're dealing with all people that are in their 20s with a product for people in their 20s, right? But we are not. We're dealing with an industry that is massive disparity in ages. So that's a big one just to focus on. Moving into this, hands-on participation, this actually goes right along with one of the tweets that we just got, right? This idea of how do you include your audience, or if they want certain things, how do they include you in that, right? Everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everybody wants to say, no, I want this, no, I want that, I don't like this, I do like this, right? And you kind of have to find that balance of how much of it you're going to listen to or how much you're not going to listen to. But the difference is, again, to go back to the idea of we have so much information at our fingertips, you can listen. So there is not a mystery about what audiences are thinking, especially if you're working on a digital platform, because they will write in the YouTube comment, I like this, I think this sucks. You know, that guy's weird looking, you know, why don't you do a video where you play this song, you know, and you can decide if you're going to listen to that or not, but that information is there, and that is more and more exclusively how audiences expect to be able to operate.
I think within organizations, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. One of the challenges we're facing is that sometimes when you're bombarded with the newness of what's happening, or you're starkly dealing with a significant change in your organization, it sometimes hardens values and principles of those people who are within certain generational groups. And trying to break that apart becomes a big, big challenge for leadership later on. Trying to see what the end goal is and why you need to all work there is not an easy thing to do. But what we're finding is that sometimes, as we're going through a lot of change, people can just kind of put the brakes on, put their foot in the cement and say, I'm done. And those are the hard conversations to have.
So collaborations and partnerships, okay, this is, as it says, layers of complexities, right? This goes back to the idea of, rather than thinking about one institution and that's your all and your everything, or whether you have an institution and you're trying to be all and everything, it's more about looking outside, right? It's about looking outside to other people that you could partner with, or people that can do things that you can't do. A really quick example of that, even for Geoff and I, is that I'm a composer. I wrote a concerto. I wanted to get it played. I asked Geoff if the Interlochen Orchestra would play it. And he said, yeah, but I also asked an NPR radio station in America if they would be willing to broadcast it. When they were willing to broadcast it, all of a sudden Geoff was way more excited about putting money into the concerto because Interlochen is going to get visibility on National Public Radio, right? It's a scenario where these three different entities, the NPR show, Interlochen, and me, all had something that we wanted. And we came together just for that one thing. And since then, I have no affiliation with those guys. They don't have any other affiliation with me. It was one project. That doesn't sound like a revolutionary idea. I know we all know about partnership, but the idea is making that the norm, not just a specialized one-off thing.
So a lot of creative partnerships. You find dance companies working with music. That's happening more and more in film. We saw a little bit that last night in the opening production. But it's also driving funders, at least in the United States, where we're so heavily foundation-driven. A lot of foundations are saying, well, I'm not going to give to you unless you go over and get this group and this group and this group, because all you're doing are the same things. And if you combine together, so that's, in a sense, diluting resources. It's also looking for different ways to find resources. And speaking of resources, here we are with money. This is the good old American dollar, not worth much. Well, the euro is better. I was just in Britain. It's still no better for the pound. But the fact of the matter is, in the United States, of course, government funding here is changing in Europe, but it's still a lot more than we have in the United States, which is basically zero. You're finding that the major corporations and foundations are changing focus. There's kind of an arts fatigue in our country. So that is kind of beginning to dry up, and the older line donors, the older generation donors who've been loyal and given for a long time are beginning to fade away. They're beginning to die. So but younger folks are looking at tweeting for charity or crowdsourcing, and you're finding a more transactional view amongst younger people of how they support organization. Oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, I won't do that. So the whole issue of resources is changing, which is why collaboration is so critical. Arts engagement. Just some interesting data from our National Endowment for the Arts of how people are actually engaging with the arts from this year's study, the 2015, 71% through television and radio, 45% through the internet, 34% are getting their arts primarily from tablet and mobile. Only 51% of Americans went to a live arts event, and that definition for this survey is very, very, very broad. So there's an opportunity for us there.
And it's a very big opportunity, and on the other slide, you notice only 50% of that is from live concert going, right? And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know we know this, but to go back to that quote, it's one thing to know it, but if you don't do anything about it, it's on you. And so we have this huge opportunity, right, where everybody's watching videos, everybody's reading blog posts. That's where they're getting their information from, and they're getting it off their phone, they're getting it off of their laptop, and moving into the next.
Right. For us, with a student population that comes from 50 countries, 50 states and 40 countries, we have hundreds of parents who are watching our webcast programs because they can't be there in person. So that access that's coming, which is what this is about, is changing. And people are sometimes viewing it as a primary experience, which for those of us really concerned and committed about the live arts, that's a big concern for us.
Yeah, and it's only going to get more intense, right? Apple Watch, how many people have tried those? They're really awesome. I just tried one last week. I don't know if I'm totally sold on it yet, but that's where it's moving, right? Google Glass, okay? That didn't really take off, but the fact that these things are getting tried again and again, that's where it's going. And we can either say that's really what's happening, and we need to start thinking about making performances that are based for that, not just we're going to play live and set up a tripod camera and then put it on the internet. Actually creating pieces and performances that are based for that platform. And again, that's our decision. We can say no, or we can just keep looking at the facts, and that's where it's going.
So we know these are going to explode. The question are we thinking ahead of how they might be used? Are we thinking of programs that we might actually develop that could use these, so we're on the front end side of the curve rather than the back end side of the curve? Not advices that aren't known, actually. 2%, not listed here, right? Other kinds of devices?
Other types of wearables.
Other types of devices, right.
Other types of wearable technology.
All right, here's your second question. So talk amongst yourself for a few minutes of these current trends: money, generation, technology, funding, participation. Which ones are impacting you the most? What are you doing about it? Okay? Tweet us at Classical2050. Take about another 5 minutes. All right, think of a pithy tweet, and we'll get going here. If your tweet delayed, you can go ahead and tweet those, and we'll pick them up at the end. So what do we have to do for 2050? For a lot of us, I'm 64. We talked about the future a lot in the late 60s and the 70s, particularly during a lot of the social revolution, and we kept talking about, 2000, the millennium. It's here. 2050 is going to be here before you know it. So what's going to take us from this point to that point, realizing that there are these things just marching along, changing the entire time, that we don't really control? And that's the hard part, is these aren't things that we control. They're much larger movements that we actually react to and participate in. The one has to do with how we plan. We tend to be a very reactive, forecast planning society, and I think particularly in the arts. We look at, okay, next season, next year, a couple years down the road, who are we going to get, what's the faculty, what's the curriculum, and we got a, what we call the hurricane cone, 10% one way or the other, it's going to work. What we really have to be looking at is what we call planning for knowns and uncertainties, and looking at multiple futures. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you can pretty much predict this, and this. So how would your organization respond if you looked at those knowns and they actually happened? We actually did this. So 10 years ago, we hired a group called Global Business Network. They're futures planning groups. They work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and large foundations. They'd never worked with an arts organization before. We engaged them in Interlocking. And they helped us. We used hundreds of people, and we looked at a whole bunch of research on what we felt were going to be critical in the world of the arts and culture that we live in and project ahead. And what we came up with was what we call forecast planning, or rather strategic planning, and scenario planning, where we looked at multiple directions, which we vetted then with all of our employees, our trustees, alumni, students, and really got them thinking about, okay, where's the future moving? It got us through a major crisis in 2009, but it helps you deal with that crisis that your organizations often experience when you're in volatile situations and there's a lot of ambiguity because the complexity has become so complicated. We also made a determined decision to move out of what we were in a closed network, where we were highly internalized. We're kind of isolated in our country. Just try to come and visit us, which we hope you do, but it's kind of hard. That we love to preserve culture and tradition and our history. We are a very tight-knit community, and we really valued safety rather than risk-taking. Tough situation as a new president to come into. And we made a decision really as a community to become more of an open network.
So open network, this is very much my generation and very much becoming the next norm. I think out of these, some of these we've already touched on, right? I think the biggest thing here is bottom-up ideas, risk-taking and experimentation, and create new resources, right? Because those are three things that really can empower you. If you have an idea, just go for it and try it, because it doesn't need to be some gigantic thing. If you have an idea for a concert, you don't need to rent a concert hall that costs $15,000 and then bog yourself down with union and making sure you sell tickets and promotion. If you have an idea for a concert, call somebody, do it in their living room, film it, just see what happens. Just try it, right? And for resources, there's now more than ever. Everybody talks about Kickstarter. Kickstarter is awesome, right? But that's already an old one. You know, if you want to make digital content on YouTube, there's an amazing site called Patreon where people can actually fund each video that you make. So every time you say, I'm going to make a video, you announce it, and they donate X amount of money. And if you have, you know, 100 patrons even, and each one donates $5, that's $500, and that's all it costs to make a digital video. It's not some big, epic, wild thing, right? So those are sort of more tangible, actual calls to action when you're going to an open network from a closed network. Or as we'd mentioned, you know, collaborating with networks that already are maybe closed, but as an outsider coming in and opening that up a little bit.
Now, I'm comfortable with the whole issue of crowdsourced funding. I am not. I'm sorry. But it is something that we're going to have to look at and be aware of. So we clearly have a generational clash. And I have a fantastic financial guy, but he wants to know how many kids we got signed up, what's the tuition going to be, what are the ticket sales going to be, because we still have to keep an organization going. That conflict is something that we all have to work on over time. Part of the ability to understand where you are in a given time is having to know what your life cycle is. And let's just go right into this. So this is the work of a woman in Minneapolis named Susan Kenny Stevens. The book is now out of print. She was at the Minneapolis Foundation. She's a social psychologist. And people were coming to her asked for money. They've got billions of dollars that they give away. And they didn't know where they were in their journey as a nonprofit. So Susan took 2 years off, studied 10,000 nonprofit organizations in the United States to try to find out what the life cycle of an organization is. Many times we're trying to apply change techniques to organizations where we don't know where we really are in that cycle. So whether you're an 88-year-old organization like we are, or you're a startup, you have an idea. Sometimes it's a group of people. Sometimes it's a visionary founder. You have a startup, you get going, you start providing your goods and services, your performances, whatever it is. You grow, you change offices, you add furniture, you add staff, you have more fundraising, and you continue up this cycle as you develop a really vital set of services until you reach the top. And then all organizations, everybody declines. It is inevitable. The question is, do you know when you're declining? Do you have the metrics that allow you to look at that and figure out what you have to do? Many of us do not. We simply keep marching on, doing the same thing. We are weighted down by organizational kind of bulk, people, costs, expenses, and we begin this slide down the slope. The really great organizations are those that understand that they're moving into decline, whether it's all programs, one program, the whole organization, and can find those metrics and find a way to pull themselves back over to the growth phase so they keep that vitality going. This is where innovation and new ideas are really critical, and even more critical today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Because I can assure you that the slide moving down towards turnaround and terminal is much faster than the slide going up. And what you don't want is to wait and have to try huge innovations when you're in a turnaround phase, which ultimately then you can't go to vitality. You have to go all the way back over to the difference between startup and growth. And it really becomes, knowing where you are in your journey is important. In our organization, there are 37 different life cycles. 5 programs, 6 different disciplines, sub-disciplines below that. Very, very, very complex. But we found a way to figure out how that is so we can stay up there in that kind of upper cone. When I came, we were in the turnaround phase. Only about 25% of turnarounds actually work. And many of them don't, and then slide into kind of oblivion. So this is really important.
And that's interesting. I know firsthand because I'm supposed to be the young guy, right? In my organization, my YouTube partner channel did just that and slid beyond the point of a turnaround. So I was on the other side of that.
You should have hired me. I would have consulted for you.
Next time.
All right. So this is by Seth Godin. If you don't know Seth Godin, he's a social marketer in Chicago. Some really fabulous stuff he does. This is the innovation adoption cycle. So think about the life cycle. And the longer your organization's history, the tougher the life cycle is to move. And then think of this. Most people take new innovations, and only 2.5% of organizations start and use them. Then another 13.5 a little bit later on, they're the early adopters. The early majority, 34%. Look at the weight at the top of the curve. And then the number of people on the far side, late majority and laggards, who wait very, very late to start the innovations. And by the time they do, you already have a whole bunch of innovations that may have actually bypassed your organization. If you layer these two together, you can see that what happens is the innovation cycle in an organization that's in challenge needs to actually move to the left so that you have more and more new innovations and ideas coming during your kind of growth phase up to vitality. Otherwise, if you add them late, it's too late, and other organizations can kind of take your, steal your territory, take your product, take your reputation, and it becomes really, really difficult. So this is a really interesting look at where you are in your organization. Anybody know Alan Brown? Has he spoken at this conference from Wolf Brown? He's does a lot of wonderful research on artists and organizational audience development in the United States. He is with the Wolf Brown firm. And he says we're moving through a period of transitions, that we have left the traditional phase. Some of us have not, but he believes we have as a society. The artist is creator, performer, standard bearer, and we're moving into it. We're in a transitional phase where the artist becomes a communicator, an interpreter, a marketer, self-employed, creating some new genre, and we're smack dab in the middle of that. But ultimately, when we talk about 2050, we're going to be moving into what he's calling the transformational phase. It's a very interesting concept, and that's Mike's area.
The transformational phase is all about, and again, this is a phrase we've heard, right? Artist as entrepreneur. Personally, I could not say that enough times. I call it an artrepreneur, right? Because as an artist, if you're not thinking that way, you're just not going to be favored as much in today's society. Now, believe me, like, this is somebody who I've been through it. I went to Interlochen, I went to Juilliard. I'm very much from the classical world, right? And you absolutely can. There's nothing wrong with just focusing on your instrument and doing that. There's no criticism there. But the truth is that in today's time, that is not the type of artist that will be favored and will be given more opportunities. That's just a fact if you look at it for what it is. And so becoming more entrepreneurial in your approach, and again, taking these different hats on, thinking, oh man, what is it all about doing a budget? What is it all about shooting this video myself? What is it all about promoting it myself, right? It's one thing to teach those things and be a student sitting there listening to it in a class, right? It's another thing to actually go out and trial by fire, do it, and see what works and see what does not.
All right, we're going to skip this question. You can go ahead and tweet it and answer it yourself. Where are you in your organization or business? Are you traditional? Are you transitional? Or are you one of the few that is starting to move into being transformational? We're going to move on because I know you all want to go to the bar. At the what reception was it they just told us about, right? But let's move on here and think about thinking differently with courage and risk. About 40 years ago, a man named Alan Kay went to work for a man named Steve Jobs, and out of that union came the Macintosh. And a huge battle that was going on in Apple Computer at the time was, is it more important to sell computers, or is it more important to sell the value of what the computer lets you do? And it came into this huge battle called share of mind versus share of market. Share of market's really important for us. I mean, our organizations have to survive, but we have to think deliberately about what happens after people engage with us in whatever way they do, online, in a concert hall, taking an education program. So share of mind is really, really critical for us to think about in the future as we look out to 2050. So where are we going? What's happened at Interlochen? Because we're right in the middle of this ourselves. We took every single opportunity that we had to look at our audiences, both on campus and off campus, and try to figure out what those kinds of experiences were. We have 8 generations of people on campus, from very young to very old, summer-long programs, year-long programs, weekend programs, public broadcasting, media that you can involve, online learning, and try to categorize all of these things and try to find out what the shared opportunities are. What are the segments where we can take one thing and use it in multiple ways to engage these different audiences over a longer period of time? We did something what we called the Interlocking Journey, and we took these different kinds of experiences and plugged people into it so that we could see the touch points. For a lot of our folks, this graphic design was really important to help them think about the roles that they would play with different generations. It isn't that the high school kid comes and graduates from the academy and goes to Juilliard, which a lot do. It has to do with how are their parents involved? How are they involved with Interlochen after that? What do they come back to Interlochen in order to be able to get? And finally, we took what we call digital touch points, because we're really trying to pull people to long-term loyalty. That's a hard thing to get in today's world. But if we don't focus on that, we're going to be giving up these new generations and new audiences as they come to us, they touch us, they have an experience, they value that experience. We've got to figure out a way to make that happen. So what happened for us? We had remarkable growth as we started this journey not quite 9 years ago. Revenue has gone up $80 million. Our programs are packed. Our programs have grown 15 to 50%. Classical, world music, ticket sales, also for our entertainment, our popular entertainment, have set record levels. Our fundraising is up. We have millions of people who are coming to us online through YouTube, our videos, our websites. It has driven the cycle. This is an organization in 2004 didn't have a website. And when I said, why don't you have a website? When I came there, they said, well, if we have a website, then people won't want to come to Interlochen. Well, that's a mindset, isn't it? There you have a view of the world. The fact of the matter is, moving to that strategy for us as a digital strategy completely transformed the institution and brought these things back because we were deliberate about taking some risks. And what do we do differently? We got to deconstruct the box.
We got to get out of it, guys. We got to get out of it, because what's going to happen is, if let's really play this out. Let's envision this future, right? If we're encouraging students and young orchestra members to be these entrepreneurs, right? We're encouraging them to think for themselves. As soon as they start to do that, I mean, right now, at least among my colleague, I think there's still fear of the industry. Will the industry accept us? But once they start to get over that fear as years come and the younger kids come up, they're going to do these things we're telling them. And guess what? The industry is going to be obsolete, because they're going to know how to make more money. They're going to know how to reach audiences better. They're going to know how to make music that people want to listen to maybe more. And the industry is going to get left behind in the dust, you know? And so we need to, it's one thing to tell the artists to do that, but it's also like we're putting the nail in our own coffin, right? We need to adopt a lot of this ourselves.
So what we're really looking at is a both and, because our commitment to the classical arts at Interlochen is not going away. But we're trying to find a way that we bridge that as new people come to us with new ideas. We have to let go of unproductive internal structures. We work very hard to lower the silo, and it's hard, folks. We understand that. It's very, very difficult. We try to reduce rules and policies and workforce barriers. For us, we are in a non-union environment, which is helpful. And for those who are familiar with tenure in higher education, we don't have tenure. But those are things that make it very difficult sometimes to move ahead with the kind of change that needs to happen. It's important to challenge custom and habit. It's great to have traditions, but not if they're straitjackets. And one of my favorite words I learned in the 1980s, actually from Alan Kay, was to help everybody fight cambirophobia, which is what industrial psychologists use to say fear of change. This is the key. Reaching and building a broader constituency, audience focus, an audience in the largest possible word, from performers and listeners and students to parents, to donors. You've got to have research. We spend a huge amount of time on research. We have a full-time researcher. Segmentation, how do you break things apart for maximum benefit across as many generations as possible, and applying that to your programs and your products.
The online presence is the number one source of that, right? That is the number one way to actually manifest all of these things that Geoff just lined out for us, okay? So on digital presence, right, video content is key, especially for us as musicians, okay? So that's a great first step, right? If you're not comfortable with making videos, if you don't know how to make videos, start to research videos that go viral. Watch them. See what they have in common. There are things in common. There are ways to make videos and content, again, that's geared towards the digital platform.
So one of the things we've been looking at is everybody says, well, if we change too much, we won't be excellent. Excellence is a movable target. And what we did in the 50s is not going to be relevant or apply to the programs and people that we're engaging in the 2000s. And so it really has to be with the value that you deliver to the people who are coming to use your products over time. It's an equation. Excellence equals value over time. And if we decide that excellence was what we've done before, and it doesn't have that chance to change over time to meet new generations, new impulses that are happening, new trends that are happening to accommodate us, then we become irrelevant. And there's nothing wrong with the quality of the programs and products that you have changing over time to be able to make that happen. Here's a guy who's been around for a while, and I'd be curious to see what he thinks about today. The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Again, it's a both-and structure. It's been fun doing this, so let's open it up to conversation, and you've been great. We've crammed a lot in here, and you can keep tweeting. All right, questions, comments, and thoughts? A lot
Just
of stuff.
move the bar up here.
Yes.
So how specifically are you preparing your students for...
Great question. So we're kind of ripping apart our curriculum. It's a little harder in the summer when they're there for a shorter period of time, but during the academy, we're actually building into the day. We've actually created a collaborative arts department that kids come, they take multiple majors, they don't major in just music or theater, and we're actually building into our day a collaborative hour for kids to come together and begin to pull different kinds of things that they're doing. We have a leadership track that we have that people can take online. So we're not getting into marketing, self-marketing, and entrepreneurship. Just it's a time factor for us, but they need a little bit more growth, but they do need to learn how to collaborate. And one of the things we're trying to do is help them provide that, because they're doing a lot of stuff on their own.
Well, and they're also,
Yeah.
Interlochen's one of the only high schools that has a singer-songwriter program where kids can study writing pop music.
Right.
Not classical, not jazz.
We've added animation. In the summer, we have a rock camp that's packed with classical musicians. We have animation, we have digital arts, we've done documentary filmmaking. So we're trying to add those niches that kids show a natural interest in while still having an absolutely fantastic orchestra.
But that's actually a very good point, really quickly. The reason how you guys started your rock band program was that they noticed that in between orchestra rehearsals, nobody would practice. They would go to a shed and they would play electric guitar.
At night they did that.
So why not? Why wouldn't you make that a program at the academy?
Yeah.
You know?
Add on that, are you doing something to get outside of the arts, even more transdisciplinary, across science, or as you said, composers or performers are not anymore these guys that
Right.
play the violin 24 hours?
So of our roughly 130,000 people who've gone to Interlochen, about 25% are gainfully employed in the arts, and the other 75% are deeply involved in the professions, law, science, technology, teaching, but still very committed to the arts. We have, during the academy, 9 months, we have a very, very, very strong academic departments, math, science, liberal arts. And there's a lot of crossover, a lot of interdisciplinary work. The physics teacher does an amazing thing on sound waves, and they're constantly changing and exchanging information. So, because we know that a lot of our kids are not going to pursue a career in the arts, but they're going to be deeply committed. So that's another interesting aspect for us. So, yeah.
How do you keep the alumni engaged?
Oh, it's a good question. They go away and they change their email addresses and we can't find them, and they do come back. We have tons of online stuff for them to be able to do. Some of them, of course, are nervous they're going to get. We have some alumni back there? Oh, good.
Hey.
All right, good. All right. How do you stay engaged? Right. All right, good.
No, hey, that's actually
Jennifer,
a great
that's
point.
right, that's right.
I was going to say, here, this is completely the honest answer. Let's be real. They promote me. Seriously. They give me opportunities, and they put me out there. And that's, as an artist, let's be very real. That's what I want, and they can do that. And so I'm definitely going to be engaged.
We have lots of different ways they can come to us, virtually through online, and that's how many of them get involved. But they come back, they do workshops, they do presentations. Many of them are performing in major orchestras on Broadway, in films. We have about 150 guest artists a year that come to our campus just to teach, and about half of those are alumni. So, any other questions? We know is it the BBC reception we're supposed to go to? Gramophone, okay. All right. And then BBC later, which I'm inviting you to, but no. So you've been great. Thanks a lot. We'll stay up here and talk for a while.